Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. Thank you for anyone who is still listening. Hopefully, you guys are getting something out of this. So I don't know how people have been feeling about these last couple episodes I've put out. I'd imagine that, well, who cares what I think? Actually, all I'm going to say is I hope that you guys enjoyed the last couple episodes. I've really enjoyed creating them. I've really enjoyed letting go and opening up a little bit more. It's been a really fun practice for me. And I hope you guys heard something interesting. Hopefully the last episode resonated with you in some way, or jolted you or shocked you into some perspective or some way of interacting with the podcast that you hadn't before. But if not, that's cool too. I'm just glad that anyone is still listening, to be honest. It's really cool for people who are still supporting the podcast and listening to it and getting something out of it. But in the last episode, you guys may remember that I focused a lot on this idea of emptiness or the void. And that idea is central to, all of Buddhism, but it's also central to my interpretation and understanding of quantum mechanics, as well as my spiritual development. And you guys may remember from the ultimate abstraction, I was talking about how Buddhism and Christianity are opposites. And one of my goals is to communicate to you guys how to resolve the apparent contradiction or paradox that comes from trying to say that these two things are the same thing, to say up is down. And one way that this can really be understood is through this idea of emptiness, because essentially I think of emptiness as the demarcation that separates Buddhism and Christianity, where you can think of the left-hand side. So imagine there is a point. And on the left-hand side of that point is emptiness, is all the symmetries of the universe. And within that realm, there are no minds, there are no sentient beings, there are no spirits, there are no selves. And on the right side of that point is the realm of existence, the realm of sentient beings, the realm of spirits, the realm of relationships, the realm of perceptions. And so from that point of emptiness, like I said, one side, the left, going in the left direction of that point, brings you into the symmetries. It brings you into the emptiness. It brings you into the algebra of reality. Whereas the right side brings you into perceptions. And why did I bring that up? I brought that up because the goal of Buddhism is to reach Nirvana, which is to say, the goal is to completely let go of the self and to completely embrace the left-hand side of this point of emptiness. So you can think of, on the left-hand side of this point of emptiness is all the symmetries. And on the right-hand side, spirits are birthed into existence. And so the right-hand side is something like what we would call reality. But in actuality, reality is the duality between the left-hand side and the right-hand side. I call the left-hand side the virtual side, which I got that term from Ted Rambles. I thought it was such a really good term to use that I just am compelled to use it. So the left-hand side is the virtual side. And the right-hand side is something like the physical side. The side of like forms and configurations, the side of information. So in other words, if you want to set this up, if you want to make this clear, think of the right-hand side as being samsara, as it would be understood in Buddhism, which is the space of sentient beings and the space in which they're suffering. If there is sentient beings, there's going to be suffering. That's just what it means to live in samsara. But from a Christian perspective, that space would be the world of sin. So we live in this world of sin, and sin is the source of suffering. And so either way, if you have any sense of self, if there's any part of you that thinks I am, then you live in samsara. You live on the right-hand side of that point. And the whole goal of Buddhism is to escape samsara. So if you're escaping, where are you escaping to? Well, you're escaping to the left-hand side, the space of symmetries, the void. You're escaping into the void. And to do that, you need to obliterate relationships. And this is what was said in that book, The Lotus and the Cross, which is a mock conversation between Jesus and Buddha, where the author has Jesus say to Buddha as a criticism, it's like, well, Buddha, all you're doing is obliterating relationships. And that is true, because in Buddhism, the concept of dependent origination is the concept that all selves are dependently originated, meaning that they are all relational. There is no singular self. All identifications of self are due to your relationships with others, due to relationship with your environment, due to relationship with the universe, due to the context in which you exist. And so there is no self without your relationship to others. And so, of course, if you're trying to escape samsara and escape to the left-hand side, the side of symmetries, then you need to obliterate relationships, which obliterates perceptions, which obliterates information. But if you are living in samsara, then there needs to be a way of coping with the suffering. And I remember I was having a conversation with my Baptist friend, Nathan, and I had him listen to the sutra, which was the sutra about the Buddha's first teachings, in which he laid out the Four Noble Truths. And of course, in the Four Noble Truths, you have the idea that there is suffering. That's the first noble truth. The second noble truth is that this suffering is due to a desire or a clinging or a craving. That's the second noble truth. And I remember when Nathan was going over this, he was like, yeah, I don't know if I agree with the origins of suffering as it's proposed in Buddhism. He's like, I think suffering comes from sin and not obeying God. And it's like, interesting. Okay. Let me take that seriously. Like, I remember when he presented that to me, it really made me think a lot. Like, okay, that's an interesting thought. Let me consider that. And I don't think he's wrong. I think that if you want to live in samsara, then you need something to cope with the suffering. And I think that that's where Jesus Christ comes in. So Jesus Christ is the perfect Son to God with zero sin. He is a spirit or being with zero sin. Therefore, he is the mechanism that repairs the relationship between God and man that was damaged during the fall the fall Adam and Eve when they were kicked out of the garden. And so eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil created a separation between God and man. And the thesis of the Bible is that was the original sin, right? And so that original sin takes you from this serene, perfect place in which you are like a child being taken care of by a holy, righteous parent with no worries or fears. And once the sin occurs, there's a separation between parent and child. And this is clear by the fact that Adam and Eve cover their bodies. And something that I've talked with Reasonable Fideus about is the idea of self. What is the self? And one way that he proposed thinking about it is the self is what you hide from others. And so when you think about it, you can think about what do you share with people depending on how close the relationship is with them. And like you don't like what you would share intimately about yourself changes from, say, a stranger on the street to a coworker, to a best friend, to a parent, to a spouse. And then you even have this stuff that you don't want to tell your spouse, that you hide from your spouse. And so each one of these rungs of what you reveal to others tells you something about the degree to which you see that other as the self. And so the more you see another as the self, the more you open up, the more you share your weaknesses, the more you share your feelings, the more you let them inside, the more you remove the barriers between you and them. And so the symbolism of Adam and Eve covering themselves once they eat from the tree is a symbolic of the damage or the separation, or the damage to the relationship or the separation between them and God. And that was due to the original sin. And so the purpose of Jesus is that he is a perfect being with zero sin. And because of that, if you follow his example, then you reconcile your relationship with God and you return back to the state prior to the fall, which is to be a loving child in perfect relationship with a righteous father. And so this is the thesis of the Bible. To live in samsara is to follow Christ and to be purified of sin so that you can be taken care of by the parent and as such avoid suffering. And this call to avoid suffering in this way in Christianity is a call to have radical acceptance of reality. It is a call to endure suffering and to not think that when there is suffering, there's a problem. Like if you speak to any Christian, like any truly believing Christian, everything is within God's will. And another thing that Nathan told me when we were talking about the book of Job is that one thing that that book is trying to tell you is that when you are encountering suffering, when you believe that the universe was created by an all-loving creator, an all-powerful, all-loving creator, then you believe that everything is going according to the creator's plan. In other words, the turmoil you are suffering through is there's something ordered about the universe. You know, the turmoil you're suffering through is consistent with God's plan. Everything is taken care of. And so when you encounter such suffering, then you're able to endure it because you think to yourself, God is righteous and God is loving. This suffering that I'm encountering right now is being handled by God. It's all within God's plan. Therefore, there's no reason to be upset. There's no reason to despair. There's no reason to curse God. There's no reason to curse reality. As Nathan always says, God is always on plan A. I know for someone who's not Christian or who doesn't think in these terms, all of this is going to sound like banana nut bread nonsense. But the thing is that there is a true problem of suffering. That is not debatable. That is objective. There is a true problem of suffering. And one thing that I've noticed about truly believing Christians is that they have this maturity to endure suffering and do it with delight and to do it with the love of God. Like enduring suffering is something that God asks of you. And so like Jesus, in Jesus' example, he had to go down a path of suffering. He had, they would say, carry your cross. He had to carry his cross, which is to carry the burden of suffering, and to do it happily, because you are doing it in accordance with God's will. You are doing it in glorification of the Father. You're doing it out of love. And so because of that, you can endure almost anything. And so it really is impressive how the religion of Christianity gives a mechanism for dealing with suffering such that you can live in samsara, such that you can live in the world of sin and not be corrupted by it. Because that's the most important thing about all of this, is that when you see others sinning against you and against themselves and against others, it's really easy to get angry and start to judge them and start to curse them and start to become self-righteous and start to other them, to really start othering these people and be really judgmental and start having hatred grow in your heart. That's extraordinarily easy. And matter of fact, it's the default. It's the automatic response. It is what momentum would dictate would happen. And so to be able to see that sin and be affected by it and to experience it and to not have it be corrupted because you think to yourself, there's nothing wrong here. This is the world of sin. This is samsara. This is how reality is. This is what it is to be a mind. This is what it means to be a spirit. This is what it means to be a self. This is what it means to exist. There's no reason to be upset. There's no reason to be angry. And the crazy part about all of this is that this is exactly the prescription. Like, it genuinely makes me laugh. This is exactly the prescription that Buddhism gives for dealing with suffering. The whole point is that whenever something goes wrong, nothing is going wrong. This is the world we live in. This is samsara. It's like radical acceptance. And this is something that I learned from Ajahn Brahm, listening to his, I don't know if you'd call them Dharma talks, but listen to his talks, is that in Buddhism, love is like this radical freedom, this radical ability to be happy when life gives you shit. And in fact, Ajahn Brahm was saying that you should be grateful when you're given shit. Like, if someone drives up and dumps a dump trunk worth of shit on your lawn, you should just be happy about it because you can go use that shit to grow from, to learn, to like you can use it as a means of growth. And so when you're given shit, you don't get upset and despair. You're happy about it because, oh, here's an opportunity to grow. And so there's this call in both religions for a radical acceptance of suffering. And I think that this is associated with maturing as an adult. I think that your ability to see suffering and endure it without going into despair and without becoming nihilistic and cynical, that's another really important thing. Like, if you come across a minor injustice, like the smaller the injustice is and the easier it is to fill you up to think, okay, everything sucks because you've come across a minor injustice, that's telling you your lack of depth. Because as an adult, for adults, to be an adult is to take on burden, to hold up society, to take care of your family, to take care of, you have to be able to endure suffering and a burden to be an adult, to take on responsibility. And so if once you see a little bit of injustice or you see a little bit of something wrong and then you just think, oh, life isn't worth living, everything sucks, the government sucks, everything sucks, it's like that's saying something about your depth as a person. And I think that your capacity to endure it and still be happy and still spread joy and to be loving and forgiving and patient, that's telling you something about your depth of love, because it's almost like that sin and that negativity just gets purified when it comes to you. But if it can take hold of your heart and spirit and your mind, if it can take hold and corrupt it, then it's like your well of love, your well of gratitude was not deep enough to endure it. Now imagine an infinite well of gratitude and an infinite well of love. Then no amount of sin and negativity can actually corrupt you. And I think that this is part of the conclusion of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Spoiler alert. At the end of the show, Aang is the main character. He's the Avatar, the Last Airbender. And his whole purpose in the show is to stop Fire Lord Ozan, I believe. Anyway, to stop the Fire Lord from killing everyone and taking over the world. Like that's the whole point of the entire show. It's for him to learn the elements and get strong enough that he can stop the Fire Lord. And right before the final encounter, the only way he sees to be able to accomplish his goal is to kill the Fire Lord. That seems to be the only option available to him. And so he was raised as a monk. He's essentially like a Buddhist monk. And within his tradition, with his spiritual and religious tradition, killing things is just not an option. You're not allowed to do that. To kill something is to ultimately destroy his sense of self. He would have to sacrifice his self for the greater good of the world to stop Fire Lord Ozai, I think his name is. And so before the final encounter, he meets a lion turtle, which is this giant wise turtle in the show, this giant wise spiritual being. And the turtle reminds him that before we bent the elements, we bent the energy within ourselves. And so when it comes time for Aang to kill the Fire Lord, instead what he does is he links his spiritual energy to the Fire Lord's spiritual energy. And the way the show depicts it is that the Fire Lord's spiritual energy is depicted as this red colored energy, and Aang's is depicted as this blue colored energy. And what you see is a battle between those two energies. When the red energy starts winning, it starts engulfing the blue energy. And what happens is that the red energy almost entirely engulfs the blue energy until there's nothing left. And right before the blue energy is completely subsumed by the red energy, Aang is able to let go and purify the red energy to the point where he's able to take away the Fire Lord's bending, thus rendering him harmless. And so, to me, this is the story of Christ. This is what it means to be Christ-like. It is to be able to look at the evils of others and not have it corrupt your soul, and instead to be able to purify it. And to purify it requires a radical level of love and gratitude and depth, such that seeing negative things does not fill your heart up to the point where you become cynical and nihilistic. You see? And so this seems to be the answer of suffering offered by Christianity, but it's also the answer of suffering offered by Buddhism as well. Radical acceptance. And in Buddhism, the idea of the radical acceptance means that you're able to maintain happiness. You're able to maintain gratitude under all circumstances. But yeah, so the point is that if you want to understand me, if you want to understand what I'm trying to communicate, understand this. Within my model of reality, there is the physical side and the virtual side. The virtual side consists of all the symmetries of the universe. And the physical side consists of physical matter and energy that can be molded. And the configuration of matter and energy determines the spirits that are called forth from the virtual side, the side of symmetries, that which is unchanging. The side of symmetries is like the side of the eternal, that which is unchanging. And when you are navigating your mind, when you're navigating the space of spirits, you are programming yourself. You are programming your physical matter and energy to be in one configuration versus the other. And which configuration you're in determines which spirit is called forth from the eternal, from the virtual side. And those spirits that call forth, they speak to you. And if you listen attentively and you really try to reduce the amount of chatter in your mind between what is being communicated to you and what you hear. In other words, to be sincere is to try your best to listen to what emerges from the void, directly from the void. It's like listening to your muse. Ask your question, why am I doing this? Who am I? And to be able to get closer to an answer, you want to quiet the chatter in your mind. And you want to be able to listen as much as you can. And so you have a point. On the left side of that point is emptiness, entropy, symmetries. On the right side of that point is configurations, and spirits that exist, the perceptions and information. That's the right side. That's samsara. That's what it means to be a mind, to be a self. It is to be a thought. It is to be a thought. It is to have awareness. It is to be a creator. So, with that being said, I hope you guys enjoy the main recording this week. I am reciting another poem. The poem is called It's Turtles All the Way Down is the Correct Answer. And of course, when I say it's turtles all the way down is the correct answer, I'm saying that the infinite regression problem, which was introduced in the first episode of the first season, What is the Bottom Turtle? The answer to the infinite regression problem is actually it's turtled all the way down. It is the correct answer. Because it's funny because within that anecdote of why the person said it's turtled all the way down, they were using that as a shorthand because they can't actually explain why one proposition is true without using another proposition. You know, that's the whole point to that infinite regression problem. They're trying to find a single point. You're trying to find a single truth from which all other truths emerge. The singularity, the one from which all others emerge. That's what you're trying to find in the infinite regression problem. And the response to that question is, it's turtled all the way down. You throw your hands up and just say, it's turtled all the way down. But consider that it's turtled all the way down is indeed the correct answer. And with that being said, I present to you, It's Turtled All the Way Down is the Correct Answer by Dr. Shannon Ray. Peace. It's turtled all the way down is the correct answer. This is because it instantiates entropy as an eternal law. There is always uncertainty. There is always a lack of information. There is always randomness. There is always the unknown. There is always emptiness. Anything that is made singular has nothing with which to be compared. Therefore, there is no information. There is no meaning. There is no existence. There is no life. There is no consciousness. But this also means there is no suffering. There is no hatred. There is no injustice. And there is no death. The true fate of all singularities is the death of the self. This is why, if you want to be part of the whole, the all, the one, the Tathagata, the suchness of all things, you must sacrifice your whole identity, all of it without anything missing. The oneness without anything missing. The gauge field, the space of all perceptions and all relationships between perceptions. The algebra, the change without change. The constants, the constraints that create the rules of our world. The symmetries. That which generates all laws, all perceptions, all realities, all truths, all falsehoods, all gods, is the singular. But anything like that cannot be conceived, because if something was conceived, then there is a perception, and perceptions are traits of sentient beings, of spirits, of I-U relators, of minds, of creators with identities and experiences. And if an identity exists, then one has not sacrificed everything and one is not empty. Thus, as an alternative to emptiness, there is more than one, which allows for comparisons, which allows for relations, which allows for characteristics, which allows for information. This is what it means to exist, as something that is alive, as something that will die, as something that has arisen, as something that has been born, as something that clings to life, as something that suffers. But much of the suffering is suffering from the mind, of clinging to realities you can't let go of even if they harm you. How do you avoid suffering? By letting go. It's okay to let go of the shame that arises when you fail. If you can't accept the failure as part of who you are, then its arising into existence means something else that is not you has arisen. and that which existed before the failure has died. This perceived death creates grief, and clinging to the grief creates a reality that does not benefit you. But failure does not mean that you have died if it is accepted as part of the self. This acceptance allows you to let go of the grief because the perceived death never occurred. Only sentient beings who can let go of self understand this. This letting go of self allows you to be resurrected so that you can play the game again, to defy death by accepting it. This is the spirit of Christ, the Redeemer, the Purifier, to defy death and be resurrected through the love of Christ. A relationship, a clinging. But that's okay. We accept the law of impermanence, and our response to it is to unite as one and cling together. The gluing spirit of Christ is the spirit of love. To build gods and be monuments to them. To be a monument to your God is a life worth living and accepting. Have joy in God's creation and be happy. Love it and don't take it for granted. Make God's monument stable by obeying God's laws. Be content. Accept suffering, but continue to love God and be grateful. Sacrifice your identity to a higher power and, as a result, be in relationship with that higher power. See it sincerely. When something surprises you and you don't know why, examine it. Examine why you think that way. Why do you find this beautiful? Why do you find this compelling? And I bet if you ask that question absolutely and sincerely, you'll never find a bottom. You'll never find an essential self, because there is no essential self. There is no bottom turtle. There is only emptiness in absolutes, in singulars, in the whole. This is because anything that is made singular has nothing with which to be compared. Therefore, there is no information. But rejoice in this, because this means there is always freedom to create so that the objective never dominates the subjective. No matter how hard you try, there will always be uncertainty, a lack of information, another turtle. And why? Because it's turtles all the way down is the correct answer. The bottom turtle is that there is no bottom turtle. A and not A.